Modern society has perfected the measurement of intelligence. We issue academic degrees and test scores with precision, assuming these credentials produce individuals capable of sound ethical decision-making. Yet high-level credentialed intelligence repeatedly fails to prevent catastrophic misjudgments. Consider the architects of the Vietnam War. Robert McNamara and his team represented the peak of educated, rational leadership. They applied intense, deliberate analysis to their strategy, yet engineered a generational disaster. Contrast that slow, deliberate failure with a sudden physical reflex. A driver on a dark road sees an animal in the headlights and instantly swerves the car onto the dangerous shoulder to avoid it. In that fraction of a second, the driver performs no cost-benefit analysis. There is no time to rationally weigh the value of the animal against the cost of a broken axle. The action happens instantly. This suggests that high intelligence and rational thought are not the primary drivers of moral action. For the driver to save the animal without thinking, a distinct, incredibly fast mechanism must exist, one that precedes our conscious choices. This discrepancy is the foundation of Consciencology, an academic framework that re-examines the mechanics of human morality. Consciencology defines conscience as an immediate biological mechanism, rather than a downstream product of deliberation. This discipline explores the hypothesis that our conscience functions as a precognitive screener. It filters incoming data and dictates our actions before a rational cost-benefit analysis can even convene. To understand this system, we need to deconstruct the mechanics of this screen. We will track how it regulates emotional states, converts knowledge into wisdom, and look at the historical patterns that suggest its existence. If conscience acts before rationality, then our current academic structures are focusing on only one part of a two-stage process. We are measuring the intelligence that follows the decision while ignoring the mechanism that makes it. Let's return to the physical reality of that swerving driver, freezing the timeline in the exact millisecond before the steering wheel turns. We can analyze this moment through the precognitive conscience hypothesis, or PCCH, which provides a lens for mapping how humans process high-stakes events. This chart maps the timeline of cognitive processing during a crisis. The x-axis tracks time in milliseconds, and the y-axis tracks our brain's level of engagement. Rational calculation requires deliberate analysis. As the curve shows, organizing data and projecting outcomes takes far too many milliseconds to execute when a car is moving at 60 miles per hour. Yet the physical swerve happens here. This spike is the paradigna, the sudden pause that precedes thought. It occurs significantly before the rational mind has time to assemble. The body acts against its own material safety without deliberation. This indicates a screener makes the call before the brain starts a calculation. The physiological reality of the paradigna suggests that conscience functions as a biological reflex. If moral action were strictly a cultural calculation, it would be unable to outrun the speed of our rational processing. Beyond physical reflexes, we have to look at how this screener manages the complex psychological states we experience every day. The PRS framework, or shape registry, plots human behavioral states using three geometries. The circle represents natural reason and human connection. The square represents a transitional rational state, and the twisted square represents irrational conflict. As we take in the world, incoming intelligence and emotional data pass through the precognitive screen at the center. The screener sorts this raw input into these three behavioral states. A healthy screener regulates safe movement between our rational needs and our innate reason. An ineffective or bypassed screener allows raw irrationality to dictate our actions, leading to the twisted square of conflict. This raises a vital question. Is this regulatory screener an innate feature of human biology, or is it a cultural technology we pick up from our environment? To test this, we must look at the historical record and see if isolated cultures arrived at this exact same mechanism entirely on their own. We can test the origin of conscience using a historical sorting mechanism called the two-bin doctrine. This matrix separates historical data into two bins. The first is transmitted hybrids. These are moral systems that spread through physical contact and translation, like Moorish Islamic culture shaping the Portuguese Age of Discovery, or Jesuit engagement with indigenous populations in Brazil. The second bin is independent convergences. This contains thinkers separated by vast oceans and centuries who arrived at the same moral frameworks without ever meeting. This includes axial age thinkers like Confucius, Laozi, and the Buddha. Socrates belonged to this independent bin. Confronted by the oligarchs of Athens, he drank poison rather than compromise his screener, dying with his conscience intact. His student Plato later misdirected this legacy, favoring formal rationalization over the intuitive reason Socrates actually practiced. We see this independent arrival in indigenous frameworks. The Cherokee concept of gadugi mandates working together for communal good, enforcing a deeply embedded harmony ethic. Even stories attributed to the Cherokee, like the parable of feeding the good wolf, rely on this same premise of choice. Whether that specific story is ancient oral tradition or a 20th century sermon attribution, its ethical mechanics align with independent frameworks worldwide. The recurring convergence of isolated cultures on these specific mechanics suggests that this screener is a characteristic feature of the human species. If this screener is a recurring human feature, we can track how it processes information over a lifetime. The philosopher Wang Yang-ming understood this when he formulated the concept of knowledge-action unity. To him, knowing something was inseparable from acting on it. This is the Chinese character ji, meaning to know. It represents the baseline accumulation of intelligence. Consciencology proposes a critical etymological update, the addition of the radical representing the sun, or the passage of time and illumination. This addition completes a metamorphosis, creating a new character, wisdom. This creates wisdom-action unity. Bare intelligence is morally neutral. It only becomes collective wisdom when it is successfully passed through the conscience screener over time. Without this metamorphosis from bare knowledge into actionable wisdom, high intelligence remains unguided, placing immense power in the hands of those who lack the mechanism to control it. This brings us to an institutional crisis. Our global academic systems exclusively measure the accumulation of knowing, but provide no metric for wisdom. We have seen the historical consequences of credentialed individuals operating without an active screener. Rationalization, when untethered from a pre-cognitive conscience, is frequently used as an intellectual tool for justifying massive global conflicts. There is a discrepancy between the elite institutional pedigrees of these policymakers and the devastating real-world outcomes of their strategies. Robert McNamara remains the prime case study. Years later, he performed the audit himself, confessing in his memoirs that his brilliant team was entirely wrong. The standard PhD system leaves a gap. It certifies the mastery of intelligence, but leaves the screener unexamined. Consciencology proposes an institutional addition, the PhCD. The PhD validates the data. The proposed PhCD validates the filter. The PhCD shifts the focus of the academy, certifying what a graduate's knowing actually serves. This leaves the discipline an unresolved challenge. A standard dissertation is defended with arguments. How does a candidate demonstrate a screened conscience to a committee? Designing this defense requires caution. If executed poorly, the process collapses into mere performance or rigid ideological testing. The only safeguard is the Socratic standard. As Plato recorded in his Apology, an unexamined life is not worth living. A true PhD program requires that the screener relentlessly examine the examiners themselves. If conscience precedes thought, we cannot keep handing power to the smartest minds and hoping for the best. Reforming human systems requires that we finally learn how to certify the silence before the decision, rather than just the rationalization that follows.